Here's a question for you. What are the 5 types of online cybersecurity threats for families? To help us identify these threats, we're joined by Kyle Hanslovan, CEO of Huntress Labs, a leading expert in cybersecurity. Kyle, thanks for your time. How can families recognize and, of course, avoid phishing scams to start? I get most of them each and every day.
It seems like they just keep coming, right? From different vectors now. I used to get them in just good old-fashioned phishing emails, but then it became text messages. Now I'm getting them in-app, right? So the thing I would give you from the top is to understand a threat actor is trying to set up, right, a scenario that makes you feel both vulnerable, but also really playing on a sense of urgency. So if I could give you any part of feedback, right, is you really have to think through, why in the world would this scenario play out, right? Who's trying to abuse my trust? So think about that phishing email that's maybe sending you that 6-digit one-time use code and then somebody following up and asking for that. The app has always told you don't share that, but someone will create a sense of urgency, try to abuse your trust. Likewise, those emails, when you think through, I haven't logged into my bank account, but my bank account is asking me to double check something that I didn't do. I would just encourage your audience to continue being vigilant.
Yeah, very well said. And it's sort of those simple things you can do when it comes to sort of really scrutinizing what's coming through. I've had to talk to my parents multiple times not to send details to XYZ. But how can parents protect their children from online cyberbullying? It's a huge, complicated topic that's been going on for years now, ever since the internet. I can only imagine growing up with social media in high school, but what have you witnessed?
Yeah, so cyberbullying is complicated. I have 3 children of my own, and to be very frank, it usually starts at the top with open communication, just like the way that we're talking right now, saying, hey, there's shady hackers, right? Folks that are going to try to deceive you. There's going to be kids, often it's teens, but it can happen even younger now that everybody's got a device. And the parts that I always encourage, both with my children and the things that I've been received advice on as well, is if you can't start with an open communication that this is going to happen and really make sure that the kids are feeling trust at the end of the day, it's going to be very hard to even spot cyberbullying. Pull that thread a little bit further and you start asking, like, when it does happen, how do you respond? And I just remind parents, like, back in the day when, think of your average car, it didn't even have a seat belt if we go back 50 years ago. Nowadays, you don't even have to tell your kids to buckle up. It's part of their know-how. Today, though, modern parenting means modern communication, and it means you have to stay on top of what you're going to allow them to go to and the environments you allow them, because each chance is an opportunity to be bullied.
Yeah, Kyle, that's very good advice. Let's talk a little bit about the red flags that suggest the presence of online predators targeting family members. It's an alarming area to discuss, but take us through some of the red flags that you've sort of identified.
Yeah, so red flags right away. If you think about this, when you move to predators, almost always it's children, just kind of like cyberbullying. And even though bullying can come in all different shapes and sizes, when it usually comes to a predator targeting, it's going to be targeting somebody that's vulnerable. Usually it's going to be like peppering them with affection, maybe giving them attention they're not getting, maybe as a result of cyberbullying. And so what happens is just knowing where, for instance, your family members are getting their information. Where do they lurk? Are they on something like maybe a gaming platform? Are they using an in-app that everybody uses? But any chance for somebody to communicate is a chance for somebody to be able to target a vulnerable member of our families, a chance for them to make them feel wanted. And their ultimate goal, right, as red flags, so they're going to go and try to isolate. They're going to try to gather information. So you really have to have not just a conversation about bullying and being open. You've got to not only share with your kids that this is again going to happen, but you need to make sure that you're looking for the red signs, like them withdrawing or spending time maybe on their phone or on their device outside of regular patterns, because that's when someone's going to try to target them, when there's not a family member to protect.
Yeah, very good advice from you there. And of course, it's always such a nefarious thing, as you sort of outlined there, the way that they do it. But let's talk about safeguarding devices from malware and, of course, these predators as well. Take us through a little bit about how we can do that. Is there any safety that you can recommend for us today?
I always like to give a hot take here. And at the end of the day, my first challenge is, why are some of the vendors even allowing these devices to have an option of, like, do I patch? Do I not patch? Can I get phishing email? Can I not? So first and foremost, I think as consumers, we got to make sure that we're challenging the vendors who we give money to or the services that we use to make sure that they're living up to their obligation. With that said, we can't stop there. So things that you can do easily from the early 2000s all the way now, there's been the advice of you need to run a security product. that means you have to be in tune. Could you imagine if like you went to work maybe and your hair was out of whack, or you weren't wearing like the proper clothes for or the right attire to be able to go? You have to think about your own device. Is your device ready for the day? Is it patched? Is it secure? And sometimes you get these one-off applications that expire after 14 days. That does no good for you in protecting you at home if it's not turned on, enabled, and ready to go. So my advice there again kind of goes back to earlier advice. Vigilance, but in a different way. And you can't just count on, does the provider, does TikTok, does WhatsApp, does whatever the app actually do a good job keeping me patched? You got to check these things. You got to keep them up to date. You got to stay ahead of the threat actor. And that's what I got to say about that.
Kyle, that was a great rundown from you and just perfect on the time I've got here. But thank you so much for joining us on the program. Hopefully you and I get to speak again, because as we know, this is only going to continue and we need to keep our eye on how we navigate it moving forward. But great advice from you, and thanks again for joining us.
No, I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, there you go, some practical advice to keep an eye on your devices. I, of course, look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Be sure to head to tickernews.co, and I hope you've learned something from our discussions thus far. Also, add two-factor authentication, change your passwords. There's some good cyber hygiene going around. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Be well.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.